Okay, so scene 7. We started working on scene 7 in our last lesson. We'd finished working on all the scenes up to now. We'd been recapping them and going through them and rehearsing. So we finally got onto scene 7. Scene 7 is a bit different in comparison to the scenes that I've done before, because I feel like scene 7 reveals a lot about Carol's character. So on first look at reading through, we find Carol at a wedding with a character called Laura. Now, Laura isn't someone who's particularly a major character in the play or very relevant to the three main generations, but Laura is someone that Carol meets at a wedding who takes an interest in her. At first time reading through, I thought that she was a bit creepy, and I thought that Carol was a bit creeped out by her, in the fact that she was a bit full on. She knew a lot about Carol, and Carol didn't know a lot about Laura. She says things like, we were all so in love with you at school, and God, I can't believe it's you, and you're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So she sort of admires her, but I felt like it was in a creepy sort of way when I first looked at the play and this scene. At the same time, what's going on is in the centre scene, Anna is painting the house with Jamie. They're moving in and they're talking about getting a pet, and it's sort of this happy, sort of joyful contrast to everything deep that's been going on. I felt like Anna's scenes had gone from quite serious to an upwards sort of, they were going up in this hopeful sort of look, and because we've only really looked from scene 1 to scene 7 in depth so far, I feel like scene 7 is probably the bit where Anna's the happiest. So in regards to more towards Carol's side, I'm in more Carol's side. But one thing I also realised at this point when we were going through the scenes is that I am able to explore all three generations because I jump generations and I'm different characters. I realised that I will be in different casts for these different characters, but it allows me to explore both casts, and it allows me to explore both types of Carols and how they're played, and types of Annas and types of Bonnies, and the generation gap and the generation difference and how it's more accepted in one thing. And that's one thing I keep reminding myself and have to remember, because a character like Laura placed in Bonnie's generation is more towards someone like Jo, and I saw a lot of similarities between Jo and Laura, but because of the time zones that we were in, it made it very different in a different circumstance. But I also, what I've said before is that I thought that Carol was out of her time zone and ahead of her time, because the way she reacted would not be something of her time zone. You would expect her to react more like Emma, which is a character I'm going to talk about because in scene 8 I am playing Emma. Anyway, back to this scene and the dynamics of this scene. The introduction to this scene talks about how Carol isn't dancing. Carol's sitting down, she's smoking, and Laura is there with a drink. I talked about my initial thoughts. Once I reread it, and the way that Mr. Chip directed it wasn't as I expected, but I think it made it better, and it made more sense in Carol's timeline and in the way that we thought Carol would be. Instead of Carol being really turned off by the idea of Laura, he said for her to be intrigued, for her to be interested in sort of this different creature, and maybe it's a hint to Carol's potentially being a lesbian, or towards that way more, instead of being attracted to John. That's a big debate, because she does have some sort of feelings towards John. It was something that we had spent a lot of time thinking about, and that's why it took a couple of lessons to go through scene 7 and the ideas behind it. Because John cares for her so much, we wanted to believe that they did have this mutual attraction towards each other at the beginning. But to develop on that, I didn't know whether she started to lose that attraction, or because she felt separated from the world and the fact that she wanted to escape the world, she started to explore different people, different ideas, and became more of this like not traditional woman of her time. And I think that that's something that's really interesting when it comes to Laura and the similarities between Laura and Jo and Bonnie and Carol's side. Missing out Anna's side at the moment, but in the fact that there's a lot of hints to sort of homosexuality, and women being strong. So looking at how Laura interacts, Mr. Chip directed her to be a bit more intrusive of the space, a bit more flirtatious towards Carol, but not a character that puts you off. You don't ever want to be put off by Laura. You just feel she's a bit intrusive, but it's not a bad sort of disgust that you want the audience to feel, or like Carol's being violated. And I think that's something that I had to get right, and something that I'm going to have to work on, because Carol's character is quite a complicated one and there's a lot going on in her head. It's something that I'm going to have to work on to be able to push the boundaries, Carol's boundaries as Laura, to flirt and get close to, but not also seem too much. So as the scene progresses, there's more talk about Carol when she was young, and it's sort of the first insights we get into what she was like before the play was set. When she was young at school, she says things like, "You were always quiet but you seem sort of mysterious," and how that has relevance to what Carol is feeling now. I think her intrigue towards Laura will set the chemistry and make the scene really interesting. Another couple of things that we had been really interested, and I found really interesting about, was when she talks about her daughter and the family life that she has, and Laura still proceeds to pursue her and kisses her. I don't think Laura has this sort of fancy, thinks that anything is going to happen between her and Carol in this, anything's going to go on. I think she just sort of is having a bit of fun at a wedding, is sort of a carefree character, and she just goes for it. One of the most interesting lines, one that I have been evaluating a lot myself, is after the kiss, Laura stands up and says, "Look at you, look at your face." To me, that could mean several things. On first reading it, because I thought that Carol was disgusted or shocked, she would be really taken back and not amused by it. So in that sense, Laura saying that would be like, "Why are you so freaked out?" Or she'd be laughing about it, or maybe she'd made a fool out of herself. But on looking at it again, I think that it's more like Laura is pleasantly amused by the fact that Carol let her kiss her, and finds the whole situation rather bizarre and funny, because she's surprised that Carol was even there in the first place and what Carol's like now. So I think on that note, the scene finishes with us having a bit of confusion towards Carol, but also an interest in more of her past and how this might affect the way she is with John now in the next scenes, because the next scene is the dining room scene with the family, with Emma and Toby and John, in how she reacts in that. Does that have any relevance to what has happened at the wedding? And that's something that we're going to look at hopefully next lesson.